identify PCM, which is protein calorie malnutrition, by the end of this lecture. You should know why we want to know a lot about malnutrition, because of the magnitude of the problem. You should understand the pathophysiology, learn to identify it clinically, and understand the basics of risk management. We will begin with the definition. And malnutrition simply means bad nutrition. It may refers to either deficiencies, excess, or any kind of imbalance in a person's intake of calories, energy, and or nutrients. However, WHO gives us a well-defined definition of malnutrition, which is the cellular imbalance between the supply of nutrients and energy and the body's demand for them to ensure growth, maintenance, and effective structure. Malnutrition, the term usually incorporates these three broad categories. The first one is undernutrition, also commonly known as protein calorie malnutrition or protein energy malnutrition. It refers to imbalances or deficiencies of macronutrients, which are the carbohydrate, protein, and fat, if you remember from biochemistry. The second category, which usually occurs along with PCM, is the micronutrient deficiency, and as the name implies, is simply the lack of micronutrients, which are the vitamins and the minerals. On the other hand, overweight or obesity is the excess of nutrients. We should all know that malnutrition in any form, either as undernutrition, micronutrient deficiency, or obesity, poses a risk to health of the population. So our focus of attention based on our community will be undernutrition, or the macronutrient deficiency, commonly known as protein calorie malnutrition. Before I move on, I would like you all to know a few nomenclatures so that you can understand the classification of PCM better. So what is underweight? Anytime a child has a low weight for his age, his or her age, then it's termed as underweight. A child who is underweight can be either wasted or stunted. So wasting means the child has low weight for the height of the child, while stunting means the height is low for the age of the child. So please try to understand and remember these terms. So underweight is anytime you have low weight for age, while wasting is low weight for height, and stunting is low height for age. Before we move on to classification and clinical presentation, I would like you all to know why we worry so much about malnutrition, because it's a huge problem globally. If you look at the numbers, so this report is from 2017, so the data is from 2016, a year earlier. So if you look at the numbers, globally in 2016, 155 million children were found to be stunted. In Asia, out of this 155, almost actually more than half of them, 87 million, were in Asia, while 52 million were wasted. And again, more than half of these wasted kids were residing in Asia. So this is a big problem for us. Again, we are not focusing on obesity, but that's a growing problem also. 41 million kids were found to be overweight or obese in 2016. So moving on to 2017 data published in 2018, the number essentially didn't change much. From 155, it came down to 151 million for stunting, and from 45, it actually went up a little bit to 51 million for wasted child. And again, not much big difference in 2018 also. So 149 million kids were found to be stunted globally worldwide, and 49 million were wasted. So there is a slightly improving trend, but it's very gradual and very slow, but steady, hopefully. in terms of stunting and wasting, but obesity is more of a growing problem, especially in the westernized culture. Here is something I do want you to focus on is stunting, because if you remember from the definition, stunting is when a child has low height for his or her age. It signifies more of a chronic problem than wasting, which is low weight for, or underweight, which is low weight for age. So if you look at Pakistan, um, this data is again from 2016. So if you look at Pakistan, it's all dark blue, which means greater than 40, and to be exact, 45% of kids under 5 years of age were found to be stunted, which means they have way below height for their expected age. Expected height for their age in 2016. So it's a huge problem in our community, and that's why we want our young doctors to know very well about malnutrition so that they can address it. And another reason why, actually the main reason, the root cause why we worry so much about malnutrition, because if you look at this data, in more than half of the cases of under 5 mortality, undernutrition contributes in one way or other, either directly or indirectly, to that under 5 mortality. So that's why we want to target or address malnutrition so that we can improve this under 5 mortality rate. Why we see undernutrition so much or malnutrition so much in the developing countries. So to explain the etiology of malnutrition or PCM, UNICEF has provided this structure framework which has divided the really. So the UNICEF has provided this framework for better understanding of the etiology of malnutrition, and they have divided the causes into 3 categories, with immediate causes operating at the individual or family levels, underlying causes operating at the community level, and basic causes operating at the government level, you can say. So we know that the immediate cause of malnutrition is either the child is not getting enough diet or enough calories or nutrients in their diet, or they are sick that they are not able to utilize it, or they are not fulfilling their demands because of the sickness. So these 2 factors leads to undernutrition at the immediate level. And why a child gets so much disease or not getting enough nutrients as per their need is because of inadequate care or unhealthy household environment or lack of health services at the societal level. And why someone or a parent or a caregiver is not able to provide adequate care or adequate diet to their kids is because either they are poor, they are unemployed for those reasons. And why we see so much of unemployment and poverty is because of how we are utilizing the resources politically, legally, and culturally. So that we can say that the root cause or the real reason for malnutrition actually operates at the government levels, how they distribute the resources to the community. For our purposes, since we know that undernutrition and infection occur together, one occurring before the other, but putting the child in a vicious cycle of infection and undernutrition. So whenever a child doesn't take adequate diet to fulfill needs for metabolism and growth, they of course lose weight, and they have growth flattening. This lack of nutrients ultimately lower their immunity, which puts them at higher risk of getting infections. These infections make them lose their appetite, leads to malabsorption, and of course during those times of illnesses they have increased nutritional requirement, but these in turn actually make them not take adequate diet, and again this starts a vicious cycle which is really hard to break. This is the same thing explained. So now that we know a few basic terms, we know how big the problem is and why we want to address it. I would like all of you to focus on how to classify it. So in order to classify malnutrition, we want to have some measures, and we use various nutritional indices to measure PCM or malnutrition, and the commonly used ones are listed on the slide. So we can use weight for height, height for age, weight for age, the middle upper arm circumference, edema, body mass index, and in some cases skin fold thicknesses to measure nutritional status of a child. And once we have these measurements, we want to compare these measurements to the normal population in order to see where the particular child stands in terms of or in comparison with the rest of the population. So there are three primary ways of making that comparison between the measurement of a specific child or individual relative to the reference population. The oldest method is percentage of median, and in fact it's the simplest method. We can use percentile and more commonly z-score or standard deviation score to make that comparison. We will go one by one to understand each of them. So what is the percentage of the median? Percentage of the median is simply the percentage of the child's measurement compared to the expected value for the reference population. It's simply like you take a test, you score, let's say 50 out of 100, and you just take a percentage of it. So that's how we take a percentage of the child's measurement compared to the expected value from the reference population. So we will take an example. Let's see if you are using weight for height to measure the nutritional status of the child. You will take the patient weight, then you will look up the weight for a normal child with the same height as that of the patient and take a percentage of it. So it will just give you an idea where do the child stands and compare to the reference population. So it's simply the percentage of the child's nutritional index compared to the nutritional index of the reference population or the average nutritional index of the reference population. A more modern way of making the comparison and a more useful way is actually percentile, which is essentially the rank order, the position of a child nutritional measurement compared to the reference population. So it's always an integral like 85th, 95th, 50%. I will give you an example to make it more clear. So when we say that the child's measurement is at 50th percentile, it simply means that half of the children of the same population and age, the same biostatistic profile, are above that child's measurement and 50 are below that. 50% of them are below that. Similarly, when we say that the child's height, let's say, is at the 3rd percentile for his age, that means that 3 in approximately 100 children are below or are shorter than him, and 97 are likely to be taller than particular child. So it's simply your position among a group of people. Another way, which is a more complicated way but gives us very useful information, is z-score or the standard deviation score, which is essentially a measure of dispersion of the data. It tells us how far or how outstanding our child's measurement that is of interest is from the mean population. Is expressed in histograms. If you have ever encountered one, a histogram with a normal distribution is called a bell chart because it's in the form of the bell, because the mean, median, mode all falls in the same line of 0. They are all the same. And 50% of the population falls on top of the mean and 50% falls below the mean. Okay. And then of course, based on the population data, we calculate the standard deviation score and plot it on the charts available. So here is the WHO chart. Is just one of the examples. We have many for weight for age, height for age, weight for height, BMI for girls and boys separately, because we know that their expected nutritional indices or measurements are different based on their genders. So this chart is for weight for age for girls from birth to 2 years, and it's a Z-score based chart by WHO, so one of the commonly used charts. You look at the green line, this is the zero, which means the mean line for weight for age of girls between 0 to 2 years. And then you see the red lines, which the top red line is the +2 standard deviation line, the bottom red line is the -2 standard deviation line. Similarly, we have the -3 and 2. Then I will come back to this chart later on. So after that, we have gone through how we measure, what nutritional indices we use, and how we compare them. And let's look at few of the classifications that we have. One of the oldest one is Gomez classification for malnutrition. It uses the percentage of median for weight for age. Okay, so it's the simplest classification we have. So if a child has weight for age of a child falls between 75 to 89%. For his or her age, we say that the child has mild malnutrition. If the weight for age falls between 60 to 74%, it will be moderate, and if it is less than 60% for the median weight for age, then it will be termed as severe malnutrition. The lackings of this classification is that it only look at the weight for age, which we know that is only indicates a very acute changes in nutritional status, doesn't address chronic changes by looking at the height of the child. And that leads to other classifications like the Waterloo classification, which brought in weight for height of the child as well, along with the height for the age. It gives us a better idea not only on the acute nutritional illnesses but also at the chronic state, because it has height for age included in the classification. Waterloo also used the percentage of median for making the comparison. So now you are looking at two indices for both of them, height for age and weight for height. If they fall between 80 to 90, then it is mild, and for height for age, it is 90 to 95%. Moderate if the weight for height is between 70 to 80% of the median, and height for age is 85 to 90. You don't have to remember all these terms. The only classification that you would need to remember is the WHO. But before the WHO, we had another classification, that is the Bantam classification, which included some of the clinical features of the malnutrition as well in the classification, besides some anthropometric measures. So in the Wellcome classification, we had weight for age and edema, and they classified it clinically into kwashiorkor, Mayer-Smith kwashiorkor, under nutrition, and marasmus alone. Here is the WHO classification, and this is the one that I would like all of you to remember by heart, because it will be asked and expected of you to know. So WHO classification uses three anthropometric indices: weight for height, height for age, and mid upper arm circumference, as well as presence or absence of edema. So we know that anytime a child has edema, they automatically falls into severe malnutrition. While for weight for height, they are using the standard deviation or Z-score. For weight for height, if it is between -2 to -3, then that will be moderate. If it is less than -3, then that will be severe. If height for age is between -2 to -3 standard deviation score, then again it will be moderate. If it is less than -3, that will be severe. For mid-upper arm circumference, the metric number is 125 millimeter. We want them to be higher than that at the mid-upper arm. If it is between 125 to 110 millimeter, then that will be moderate. If it is less than 110 millimeter, that will be considered severe. But remember, anytime there is edema, it will automatically be classified as severe malnutrition. Here is a chart that has put all the common classifications together, but again, I would all just emphasize on the WHO classification for you. Again, we can classify malnutrition based on the clinical features into marasmus, where there is severe wasting, kwashiorkor, where there is more edema and wasting, and then a combination of the two termed as marasmic kwashiorkor. So in marasmus, there is severe loss of the subcutaneous fat, leading to an appearance of old man with a skin bone appearance. They are also called simian faces because of the old man features. And you can see they have lost all the subcutaneous fat, leading to this old man faces, the baggy pant appearance because of the loss of the buttock fat, the skin, loose skin folds, again because of the loss of subcutaneous fat, the prominent rib cage, thin extremities. Usually the marasmic case, they have lost more fat than proteins, and that's why they don't have edema, and they are usually more active and more stable, considered more stable compared to kwashiorkor, which have a very pathetic appearance. They have a puffy appearance because of the presence of edema, because in this case of PCM, there is more loss of protein compared to fat, which leads to edema, but the extremities can be thin. And you can see the changes in the hair and the skin as well. We can have a combination of the two with a lot of ascites and very thin extremities and the old main faces of the marasmus. This one is termed as marasmic kwashiorkor and is considered clinically as one of the most severe form of PCM. So what happens in PCM, how our physiology and metabolic system changes. So of course, there is a lot of changes physiologically and metabolically when a child has protein calorie malnutrition. So anytime a child does not have adequate intake of protein and or energy, and of course the body goes into an adaptive state. There is a reduction in the protein stored. So wherever we have protein dominance, those tissues start losing their mass, like the skeletal mass is lost, the heart becomes thin, the respiratory muscles become weak, and of course the protein reserves are low and low. So body adapt by reducing the metabolic rate so that their demand and needs are reduced, and they go into a neutral state where they match their low intake with their slow metabolic rate. So this is called a successful adaptation where there is zero protein and energy balance. Whatever they are taking, they are utilizing in the metabolic, the minimum metabolism that we need. They are maintaining a normal serum albumin level. Also, their growth starts flattening there because whatever they are using, they are consuming, they are utilizing in their basic metabolic needs. So nothing is left for their growth. So they have a successful adaptation, but with flattening of growth. So anytime during those periods of successful adaptation, there is an additional stress in the form, either in the form of a metabolic stress, let's say in case of an illness, or a micronutrient deficiency, or further decrease in the intake as in cases of starvation. This adaptive system fail, and then they go into a loss of protein and fat, which development of hypoalbuminemia, immune deficiencies, and on, which can ultimately lead to death if not addressed at the time. So we will just go system to system to look at those pathophysiological changes that we see. I will be quick because I want you to focus more on the management. So as we said, all of the systems kind of slow down in cases of reduced intake of energy and nutrients. In the cardiovascular system, we have a reduction in the cardiac output and the systolic stroke volume. Usually the blood volume is increased. To compensate for that, and any further increase in volume, let's say in the form of NIV bolus, that people may use sometimes in those PCM trials, can easily trigger acute heart failure. Because of the reduction in stroke volume and cardiac output, the tissue perfusion, of course, is compromised. The BP is low, the renal perfusion and the circulation times are reduced, but usually the plasma volume remains normal. In the gastrointestinal tract, there is reduction in the production of gastric acid as well as intestinal mortality. Because of the lack of use of digestive enzyme, the pancreas is usually atrophied gradually with production of lesser and lesser amount of digestive enzymes. The intestinal mucosa also get atrophied, and of course that leads to malabsorption. In the liver, of course, the capacity of the liver to take up and metabolize toxin is reduced. Energy production from galactose and fructose is much slower than normal. Gluconeogenesis is almost not happening because, of course, they don't have anything extra. And bile acid secretion is decreased as well. In the genitourinary tract, as I mentioned earlier, because of the reduced perfusion of kidneys, the glomerular filtration rate is also reduced. The renal capacity, of course, to excrete excess salt and water is reduced. So usually these kids are always a little bit of on the higher end of volume as the total body water as well as total body sodium is higher. Yeah, immune system, essentially all aspects of immune systems are diminished or slow or impaired in cases of PCM. Endocrine system, we know that because they are not consuming much nutrients, the insulin levels are decreased, and when the insulin levels are decreased, the contractory hormones like the growth hormone and cortisol level increase. Metabolic, we know that there is great reduction in the rate of metabolism to decrease the needs of energy. They have an impaired heat generation mechanism as well as a lot of heat loss because of the lack of the subcutaneous fat. So that made them prone to becoming hypothermic very easily. At the cellular level, the sodium pump activity is reduced and the cell membranes become more permeable compared to normal states. And this is why usually the kids with PCM has very high levels of intracellular sodium, whereas deficient in potassium and magnesium. So what we see clinically in cases of malnutrition, as I already mentioned, in cases of kwashiorkor, you may have a puffy face, which is termed as a moon face, while in cases of marasmus, you more see of the old man faces, also called simian faces, with the loss of subcutaneous fat. In the eye, you can have many signs of micronutrient deficiency, especially from vitamin A deficiency. You can see dry eyes with development of white rot spot, which is these cloudy, puffy white um, white spots due to lack of deepithelialization. The conjunctiva can look pale because of iron deficiency, anemia, and there may be periorbital edema because of hypoalbuminemia. In the mouth, you can see angular stomatitis because of lack of zinc and vitamin C, cheilitis, and glossitis, as well as spongy bleeding gums, again because of deficiency of vitamin C. There may be parotid enlargement due to lack of utilization of salivary glands, and you can see a lot of changes in the dentition as well, from enamel mottling to delayed eruption of teeth due to deficiency of vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. There are many changes seen in the hair as well. Generally, they become dull, sparse, brittle, and easily pluckable. In the severe forms of malnutrition, you can even see hyperpigmentation. And in prolonged cases, you can see a plaque sign with alternating bands of light and normal color denoting normal phases of growth interrupted by flatter growth. The eyelashes for some unknown reason become very long with tapered ends called broomstick lashes. In severe cases, especially in cases of kwashiorkor, we can see alopecia as well. The skin again shows many different signs. Like in marasmus, as mentioned before, it becomes loose and wrinkled, while in kwashiorkor, because of the edema, becomes shiny and edematous. Because of lack of zinc and vitamin A, you can have patches of dry follicular hyperkeratosis. There may be patches of hyper and hypopigmentation called flaky pain dermatosis, which involves more of the distal extremities and all the sun exposed area, commonly happening because of lack of niacin. There can be erosion, poor wound healing, etc. Nails can show polynychia, thin and soft nail plates and fissure of the ridges because of vitamin A, zinc, and iron deficiency. In the musculoskeletal system, as mentioned before, there is severe muscle wasting, particularly in the bigger groups like the buttocks and the thighs. There may be signs of hypocalcemia in the form of crossroads and choptic signs, and skeletal deformities like large deformities and the lock or bend knees in cases of vitamin D and C deficiency. Abdomen can become distended, especially in cases of kwashiorkor, either due to hepatomegaly or ascites. CVS, we know that already mentioned that there is usually bradycardia and hypertension due to weakness of the muscles of the heart and the decrease in the stroke volume. Of course, leads to reduced cardiac output. Small vessel vasculopathies are also very common in cases of um, PCM. CNS, usually they become lethargic, irritable, apathic. Of course, they have developmental delays. Their reflexes can be impaired because of hypocalcemia, lack of vitamin B12, and memory can be affected, especially in cases of kwashiorkor because of B12 deficiency. So how we manage it? Before we go on to manage it, of course, we want to investigate it, and the best way to investigate it is to follow these four categories. So, of course, it starts with clinical assessment, which includes a detailed history and physical examination with emphasis on their dietary intake. And on the examination part, you have to accurately measure their anthropometric indices like the weight, height, mid-upper arm circumference, skin pore thickness, BMI if they are 2 years older. Then based on this, you want to classify them and put them in whatever category they might be in. Usually when we need biochemical tests, we are looking for electrolyte imbalances, micronutrient deficiencies, and any signs of infection, because we remember that malnutrition and infection occur together. So we want to get a CBC that will give us clues about infection as well as anemia. Blood glucose level, especially in the early phases when they are in severe acute malnutrition, because we know that they can become hypoglycemic very easily. And of course, their kidney functions will be very important to be looked at, and to check for any sign. Source of infection, we want to get a chest x-ray, screen for tuberculosis, look at their blood and stool and urine cultures. So this is the IMNCI chart for malnutrition. This is for acute malnutrition. So whenever we have a child with low weight for age, what we do, of course, we want to look at for edema so that we can classify them. We want to determine their weight for height or length according to the disease score and measure their mid-upper arm circumference. If their weight for height is less than -3 standard deviation on the WHO chart or their MUAC, which is the mid-upper arm circumference, is less than 150, they fall into the severe category. And then, of course, we want to look at the common things as well to distinguish presence of any danger signs and, all the common danger signs that you have already learned in INCI, like presence of pneumonia. So you classify it either into complicated severe acute malnutrition, uncomplicated severe acute malnutrition, moderate acute malnutrition, and no acute malnutrition. I will just leave it on you to look at the chart in details because I want to move on to the management slides. Appetite test is a very good screening tool to decide if a malnourished child that has come to you in the clinic or the emergency department needs to be hospitalized or can be managed as outpatient. So let's say a malnourished child came to you and you did all the anthropometric measurements and you classified them and they turn out to be severe acute malnutrition on the classification chart. Then you want to give them something to eat. Ideally, in the ideal settings, you need to give them the ready-to-use therapeutic food and see how much they finish. So the expected amount they need to be finished is based on their weight. If they finish that expected amount, then they are set to pass the appetite test and they can be managed outpatient. But if they fail to finish that particular amount of food based on their age, then they need to be hospitalized because we know that if they are PCM and they do not have a good appetite, that puts them at higher risk of developing fluid and electrolyte imbalances and signifies severe infection. So this is the same thing. So you have severe acute malnutrition, either with or without complication. You give them something to eat. If they pass the appetite test, they go home and are managed outpatient. If they are they do not pass the appetite test, they stay in the hospital. And if they end up hospitalizing, then this is the 10-step WHO model for their management. And this is divided, the management is divided into two phases. The first phase is stabilization and the second phase is rehabilitation. The stabilization phase is focused on preventing and treating hypoglycemia, preventing and treating hypothermia, and fluid and electrolyte imbalances, as well as to start treating infection. While in the rehabilitation phase, we start correcting the micronutrient deficiency and start their nutritional rehabilitation. So we know that all the PCM kids are at higher risk of developing hypothermia because of the lack of the body fat and hypoglycemia because of the lack of the glucose reserve. They do not have protein, any fat left to generate glucose if they are not getting it from outside. In the early stabilization phase, this is the utmost common steps to follow. So we really want them to not go into hypoglycemia or hypothermia, or if they are already hypoglycemic or hypothermic, we want to treat it adequately. So in order to prevent hypoglycemia, we start them on feed early, but we know that usually in the early phases they are not able to utilize or tolerate much feed. So we start them on very small amount of feed, but we give them frequent feed so that they have a continuous supply of glucose in the blood and do not become hypoglycemic. And of course, we want to monitor their glucose level hourly or 2 hourly or very often based on their response. Always remember the physiologic route, which is the oral route, is preferred. IV is only used when the child is either in shock or unconscious, because remember their heart muscles is very low, very weak, already because of the PCM status, and they already have a higher blood volume. So if you give more blood volume to that weak pump, the weak pump won't be able to tolerate that high volume of blood and will go into failure. So never use IV unless and until the child is unconscious or you do not have or the child is in shock. Again, to prevent hypothermia, skin-to-skin contact with mother is the preferred route. So you want to keep them with their mother with the skin-to-skin contacts, or you can use warm blankets, warmers, and etc. as well. Remember, the next step was to maintain a good fluid and electrolyte balance, because we know that they are mostly dehydrated, high in intracellular sodium, low in potassium and magnesium. So based on those, we rehydrate them. Remember that we usually do not see the common signs of dehydration are not very reliable in PCM kids. Let's say the skin turgor. Normally we look at the skin turgor as we talked in the last lecture to classify dehydration, but in these kids the skin is already blue and because of the lack of the fat, that skin turgor becomes an unreliable sign of dehydration. So we assume that all kids who are PCM are dehydrated. But again, when we have to rehydrate them, we need to remember that their total body sodium is very high and they are low in sodium, potassium and magnesium. So that's why we do the special rehydration solution, which we talk about in our last lecture called Resomol, which is the rehydration solution for malnutrition. We cannot use the routine WHO ORS because of the same reason. And again, we never use IV route except in shock or the child is unconscious. And we rehydrate them slowly and gradually. So this is the composition of the Resomol. So compared to the normal ORS that has 70 millimole per liter of sodium, it has half, 45, and potassium is double. So in the routine, it is 20 millimole per liter of potassium in the lowest mono ORS, while in Resomol is 40. So it's rich in potassium, low in sodium with the same osmolarity. And here is the way to make it from the low or smaller ORS if we do not have the commercially made Resomol. So you can mix or double dilute the WHO ORS. So instead of mixing it in 1 liter of water, you mix it in 2 liters of water to decrease the sodium content, but then you have to add mineral mix which has abundance of potassium to make the potassium off, and add a little bit of more sugar because they need more sugar. So for infections, again, we know that most of the kids who are malnourished and needs hospitalization are easy to have infection as well, and they receive broad spectrum antibiotics. They also will need to be dewormed and offer vaccination as early as we can. We always have to keep in mind that anyone who has deficiency in macronutrients will also have some deficiencies in the micronutrient categories as well. So whenever we are evaluating them, we look for the sign of micronutrient deficiency as we talk in the clinical features, and we start them on the vitamins if we find any. So we give them vitamin A, we start them on minerals like zinc, phosphate, folic acid and copper, but we hold on iron supplements until the child has started gaining weight, because we know that iron increases the oxidative stress in the body and can be more damaging in the early phases than helpful. Feeding is their medicine. They are deficient in feeding, and that's what they need to get better. So we use it as a drug to cure malnutrition. Again, remember, as we talked earlier, to prevent hypoglycemia, we start feed early. Initially in small frequent feeding with 25 to 30% of their total need, then gradually building on it. Vomiting is not a contraindication to feed. We decrease the volume, we make it more slow, but we never want to stop feeding in these malnourished kids because it's the cure for malnutrition. Again, we always want to use the physiologic route. If they are not able to take orally, we put an NG tube and give them formula. So what kind of food we use? We have to use a special food because remember these kids do not have an appetite. That's why they ended up in the hospital. We want to start with low calorie formula. We start with F75, which is formula 75, providing 75 kilocalories of energy per 100 ml of formula. And once they are tolerating it, we move to other formulas. So these formula again are available commercially. If not available, then it can be made using milk, sugar, cereal flour, vegetable oil, and some mineral mix, mineral and vitamin. Ready-to-use therapeutic foods are another modern category of supplements. These are the foods that are ready to be used, does not need any preparation, has no additional processing, it has a very long shelf life, and of course they have good taste to match the palatability of taste. So these are usually based on ground nuts, providing all the medium chain fatty acids for quick calories, while mineral mix to provide them with potassium, zinc, and other minerals they are deficient in, and lot of sugar. So here is the feeding plan at the admission. As I said, we start with the low formula, low calorie formula, and once they are tolerating it, their appetite is recovering. Then we switch to a higher calorie formula, which is have 100, providing 100 kilocalories per 100 ml. And once their appetite is better, their fluid and electrolyte imbalances are corrected, then we move them to roto, the regular diet. And this is the same thing explained in that algorithm. There are few don'ts that I really want you all to remember, that we never use diuretics for edema in malnourished kids, because remember their overall body volume is high, but their intravascular volumes can be very compromised. So anytime you are giving them diuretics, they can go into shock. We never use iron in the first few days of stabilization until we go into the rehabilitation phase, because it's known to increase the oxidative stress and make the things worse. We never give them preparations rich in proteins early in the feeding rehabilitation. We focus on more glucose and fat in the early phases, and only after their electrolyte imbalances are corrected and their appetite has resumed that we start adding proteins gradually in their diet. We should never be using IV fluids except if they are unconscious or they are in shock. We never give them blood transfusion again, because it just increases the oxidative load, unless and until they are actively bleeding and the shock is resistant to crystalloids. Another important aspect of their management is of course providing them with tender, loving care and stimulate them sensory-wise. And again, on discharge, of course, a strict follow-up will be needed.